Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabi'a hudaha amma ba'd. The topic of our lecture at this time will be what our position is, or our position in relation to the attacks that we perceive and see and witness upon our religion. There is no doubt that the brothers who look after the center and the mosque intended and meant by saying our position, the position of the Muslims in the West, in the countries of the West, like Britain and other countries. So therefore this talk is an extension and continuation of the talk that we had last night regarding integration and all issues that pertain to that. And we must reiterate something that was mentioned in the previous lecture, the lecture of last night. We must live our lives with clarity, so that we assess and view the situation of everything and the surroundings that we have in the environment in clear light, without any illusions. There are certain questions we must ask. Are the Muslims strong these days? The answer is no. Are they weak? The answer is yes. Are the non-Muslims strong these days? The answer is yes. Do they have the upper hand? Yes. Do the Muslims have any power or possibility to confront their enemies? The answer is no. So therefore, these are things that are understood even by those people who do not particularly consider themselves religious. But due to the fact that they know life, they view things in their real light, they will agree to these facts and to these givens. And they will acknowledge them, even the people who, for example, are engaged in business or some other activity, because they are realistic people. They will acknowledge these facts that have been just mentioned. And we have also to acknowledge that the Muslims these days are dependent on the West. A long time ago, about 700 years or so ago, if you go back, the West and the countries of the West were dependent upon the Muslims and the Arabs, which is acknowledged by many of them. And they benefited from them in many areas of knowledge. But we find these days that even among the non-Muslims, we find people who speak the truth and who are fair in their assessment of the situation. One of those individuals is Prince Charles, whom I consider to be a fair individual, who acknowledges that they have benefited from the Muslims, who acknowledges that the Muslims have lived and remained in this country for many, many years, and they benefited and enriched the society they live in. And he acknowledges that they built their society upon those values, some of those values that the Muslims brought into this country. And he also acknowledges, and he repeats it in his speeches and addresses, that their civilization and their development of their society benefited greatly from many of these Muslims. And he visited Egypt not so long ago, and he visited the University of Azhar, and from the speeches he gave and the addresses that he made, it became clear that he differentiates very clearly between the Islam and the Muslims and terrorism and terrorists. And he believes that terrorism is found in any walk of life, in any country, in any religion or orientation. The same way as, for example, we witnessed and we know of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, who used to commit acts of terrorism even outside Ireland. So therefore they became known and they became listed and classified as a terrorist organization. And some of the people who clearly understand these issues made a wise statement that terrorism does not belong to any religion. And it has no motherland as such. It transgresses bounds and boundaries. It has no particular country or orientation. All of the countries of the world are now threatened with terrorism. And the Islam, the correct Islam, and the Muslims are free from terrorism. So therefore, before we answer the question of what our position and stance is towards the people and the ideas that attack our religion, we must know that the disbelievers, the non-Muslims, are not all the same. They are not all the same. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, they are not all the same. They are not equal. From the people of the scripture, there is a group of people who recite the ayat of Allah. And He also subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and from the people of the scripture, the people of the book, there are those, if you entrust him with an enormous amount of wealth, intar, he will return it to you. And from them, there are those who, if you entrust them even with a dinar, single dinar, he will not return it to you unless you keep nagging on him and stand over him. So therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a distinction between those different people. So it is wrong to generalize and to say that they're all the same. All of them are the same. Generalizations generally are erroneous and wrong. From both sides. There are people from the sides of the Muslims who generalize regarding the non-Muslims. On the other hand, we've got non-Muslims who generalize regarding the Muslims and Islam. Both are wrong. So, for example, in the case of Prince Charles, can we say that he attacks Islam and the Muslims? We can't say that. He praises Islam, he praises the Muslims. His words are favorable towards the Muslims. And there are others who constantly attack Islam and the Muslims and they criticize it. So therefore this is found on both sides. And before we proceed to answer that important question that we posed at the beginning of the lecture, we must know that they are not the same. The Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam had two uncles, two paternal uncles who were both idolaters. They both died upon shirk, upon idolatry, but they were different. They were poles apart, you can say. One of them used to love the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam extremely, never criticized him, always protected him alayhi salatu wasalam, always assisted him, and assisted his cause even, alayhi salatu wasalam. And of course, you may have guessed, I am talking about Abu Talib. The other one, and Abu Talib, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam used to love him. Not for the sake of what he was upon from the false religion, but the love that he had towards him was the love that a relative has towards his another relative, or a nephew has for the uncle. So it was a natural love, not a love based upon religious considerations. Why do I say that he used to love him? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, indeed you don't guide whom you love. And that ayah was revealed on the account of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam wanting Abu Talib to be guided. But rather Allah guides whom He wills. And he alayhi salatu wasalam tried his best throughout his mission and his life to convince him, Abu Talib, to embrace Islam. Even when he was upon his deathbed. Abu Talib was dying and the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Oh my uncle, say this expression, this word, this testimony, that there is no one who deserves to be worshipped except Allah. That testimony that I will be able to intercede with it in front of Allah for you." And the people, the non-believing friends of Abu Talib around him, saying, "How can you forsake the religion of your forefathers? The religion of your father, Abdul Muttalib. Are you better than your father?" And giving him all of these things and